right, what is up, PT on Ice crew? We are live here. We got Facebook over here, Instagram going over here. I'm Dr. Mark Gallant, lead faculty for the Ice Extremity Division, alongside Lindsay Huey and Eric Chacones, coming at you here on Clinical Tuesday. Before we get into today's topic, I just want to get through a couple housekeeping things. We got the CMFA live crew in New York this weekend, so if you haven't had a chance to take that course and you got some travel time this weekend, go ahead and hop on over to New York and check them out. Also, if you are more into the online courses, we have all of our online courses are going to be available coming up this fall. So those cohorts tend to fill up fairly quickly, so if you have not already jumped on those, make sure you jump onto those online cohorts as soon as possible, because those seats do fill up fairly quickly. A couple weeks ago I came on here and we were talking all about strength, and that the key principle for strength is progressive overload, right? And that the easiest way to do progressive overload is just adding pounds to the bar. So every couple weeks we add 5 more pounds to the barbell and we go through it that way. But there are a lot of other ways to also perform progressive overload. So we can add volume, we can change the density, we can change the frequency of the workout, we can change the effort, we can change the efficiency that you're doing the workouts at, and we can change the range of motion that you're working out. Over the last couple of weeks, I started thinking about, man, we always tend to hear this phrase in physical therapy now of just load it. Well, we just need to load it. Well, what are we going to do for this condition? Well, let's just load it, right? And I think we can do better than that. I think there is a little bit more nuance to how we load these individuals up, and that we can really start to dial this in as a profession. So last week, again, we were talking all about strength. And when we talk about strength and loading, I want you to think about 2 different people. So first, I want you to think about Al. Al's 65 years old. We've all seen Al before. He's going to come into your clinic and tell you about how he scored 4 touchdowns in one high school football game, how he had a 500-pound deadlift and could squat 250 pounds. You get the point. He's going to tell you all about his past athletic achievements. But it's very obvious when you're looking at Al that none of these achievements have come in with the last 30 years. They were all when he was 20 years old, right? So Al's coming to see you because he's having a problem getting his luggage from the ground to the overhead compartment while he's flying, right? He has a little bit of shoulder pain with this, but the bigger deal to Al is that he's a bit embarrassed by this, right? He always has to ask the flight attendants to help him out. He's fairly struggling getting that weight overhead. Al has a strength problem, right? We need to get Al stronger, and by doing that, we need all of the muscles of the upper quarter to work as efficiently together as possible to get that weight from his chest to over his head. We don't want to isolate the triceps. We don't want to isolate the deltoids. We don't need to isolate the pecs. We need all of those muscles working together as efficiently as possible with as many motor units as possible so that Al can easily get that weight from his chest to over his head. Well, on the other side of that, I want you to think about Brian, right? Brian's 6'2", 210 pounds with less than 10% body fat, and Brian actually does have a 500-pound deadlift. Brian's squat is up around 400 pounds. Brian's overhead press, or his strict press, is right near 200 pounds. Brian doesn't have a strength problem, right? Brian is a physical specimen. Brian is as strong as he could possibly be. But what Brian is having problems with is he's having medial elbow pain while he's throwing a baseball, right? And Brian's a high-level recruit, being recruited by a lot of the Major League Baseball teams as a potential draft prospect. Brian needs you to work on getting his pronator teres stronger. Brian needs you to work on getting his flexor digitorum superficialis a little more resilient. Brian needs you to get his medial triceps head a little more resilient. Brian needs the tissues surrounding the medial elbow to be a little more resilient overall. So we don't need to coach him on the strict press. We need to get those tissues more resilient. Well, how do we do that? Well, one of the best ways to do that is look at a group of individuals who have really mastered local tissue changes. And that's the bodybuilders, right? No one is better than bodybuilders at creating local tissue changes to have overall profound effect. And Brad Schoenfeld is the primary researcher looking out of all this, out of Lehman College in New York, all of the best research from a local muscle hypertrophy or a local tissue change is coming out of Brad Schoenfeld's lab. And what Brad Schoenfeld would tell us is that muscle hypertrophy or local muscle tissue change is really based on three things. That's mechanical tension, metabolic stress, and muscle damage. We're not going to talk anymore today about muscle damage because it seems to be the least important of the three components, and it also seems when the research really shakes out that it's a bit redundant to mechanical tension and metabolic stress. So we're going to spend some time on each of the other two. So mechanical tension is the king for making local muscle tissue changes. It's the most important component that we're going to have. And when we talk about mechanical tension, what we really mean is that we need enough load. So how much actual weight is on the bar, the object, or what you're doing? How much range of motion is that going through? Is that actually giving enough active tension when we contract the muscles? And is it putting enough passive tension on the muscles to make a true change? And then time under tension. And when I say time under tension, I'm not talking about necessarily the specific reps that we're going through, but more time under tension during a training cycle or multiple weeks of a program. So if I have Brian do bicep curls one time, we are probably not going to make a lot of local muscle tissue changes. But if I have Brian do multiple sets, 5 to 15 sets of bicep curls each week over a 6-week period, that's a lot of time under tension that's going to make some local tissue changes. So again, of these local tissue changes, mechanical tension is the most important factor, and that is based on how much load are we actually placing it through, what is the overall tension of that load, so how much range of motion are we placing through that tissue, and what's the overall time under tension under a training program. If mechanical tension was the only thing that mattered, then Olympic lifters and power lifters would be the most jacked individuals on the planet, right? Because these people are the masters of putting a lot of mechanical tension through the system. But what we notice is that they don't always look like the most hypertrophied individuals or the people who have the most specific local muscle tissue changes. And we can see that in that they have weight classes, right? So an Olympic lifter may want to stay at the same weight class, right? They may want to stay working out at 160 pounds, but they want their snatch and their clean to get exponentially larger while staying at that same rate. So they don't want some of these local muscle hypertrophy or to gain size. And what are they lacking? Well, they're usually not programming in a lot of metabolic stress, right? Which bodybuilders are who want all that local tissue change. And what metabolic stress, how we're going to use that to our advantage is when we think about anaerobic glycolysis, so performing exercises that last between 15 and 120 seconds, they tend to build up a lot of metabolic stress because there's decreased blood flow around the musculature during that period of exercise, and there's decreased oxygen going to the muscles. So what you're left with is a buildup of metabolites, hydrogen, inorganic phosphate, lactate. All of these things build up in the local muscle tissue, and by their buildup, they create an anabolic hormonal cascade. So they signal to all areas of the body like, hey, we've got all these metabolites building up. Maybe we need to make these tissues more resilient and more robust against this. And that's how they build it up. Well, to really look at this, that's one of the main principles of blood flow restriction, right? We restrict the blood flow and we can really maximize all of that metabolic stress, all of the metabolic stress to the tissues. Well, it turns out a really wonderful rep range to influence metabolic stress is actually 3 sets of 10. Or to maximize muscle hypertrophy and local tissue change is 3 sets of 10, because it's this beautiful rep range where you can go at high enough loads where you can actually get quite a bit of mechanical tension, but those 10 repetitions take long enough where we're actually building up some of that metabolic stress. And there's a lot of individuals in our profession that get on their high horse about 3 sets of 10, and I really think those individuals need to take a step back and really take a look at the literature and realize that it is not 3 sets of 10 that we need to be vilifying, right? It is not a rep scheme that needs to be vilified. It's the intensity, right? I completely agree with these individuals that If we're doing 3 sets of 10 with yellow TheraBand on an individual who can bench press 500 pounds, maybe that is not going to cut the mustard. But if we are doing 3 sets of 10 at an appropriate intensity, then that is a beautiful, perfect rep range to create these local muscle tissue changes, right? And when we look at Brad Schoenfeld's research and Dobson, who recently came out with a wonderful systematic review, what we realize is that it's getting close to failure that creates the appropriate intensity. We want to get right up on the verge of failure during our sets, and that is what's going to provide the appropriate intensity. I am well aware that there are many individuals that come into our clinics that may have some fear of getting to muscle failure, or that may really kind of shake them up getting to muscle failure, which the great news is as long as we're taking them within 2 to 3 reps of that failure, that seems to be good enough to create these same changes. So we really want to bring these people up to where they have just enough reserve in the tank, enough reps in reserve of 2 to 3 away from failure or getting right up to failure. And that's going to create a lot of these wonderful local tissue changes. So again, that 3 sets of 10 at an appropriate intensity multiple times a week, getting right up to failure is what's going to create these local muscle tissue changes, right? So just to recap overall, local muscle tissue changes are created by maximizing both mechanical tension and metabolic stress. A beautiful rep range to do this at is 3 sets of 10. It kind of gets the best of both worlds, of both that mechanical tension and metabolic stress. But the key factor is that you have to bring it to an appropriate intensity. And that appropriate intensity is within 2 to 3 reps of failure to really make those local muscle tissue changes so that Brian's medial elbow can become as resilient and robust as possible. Let me know what you think about this in the chat bar. We always love discussing these topics. Next week, I'm going to hop back on here and I'm going to discuss, we're looking at someone who we need to just get strong and overall strengthen versus someone who we really want to make these local tissue changes. What is the best way to verbally cue them in clinic to maximize those outcomes? I hope you all have a wonderful week. Thanks for hopping on here, and we'll see you out on the road soon.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.